Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is Ancient Roman Taverns, Wine, Mystery, and Life. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Ancient Roman Taverns, Wine, Mystery, and Life. Entering an ancient Roman tavern. Imagine walking through the crowded streets of ancient Rome just as the afternoon sun begins to soften. The stone roads beneath your feet have already carried thousands of people today. Merchants have shouted until their voices turned rough. Blacksmiths have hammered glowing iron into useful tools. Bakers have pulled fresh loaves from hot ovens, filling the air with the comforting smell of bread. Donkeys have struggled beneath heavy loads. Children have chased one another through narrow alleyways, and senators wrapped in spotless, white togas have hurried toward political meetings while slaves silently followed close behind. Everywhere, life seems to move at an incredible speed. Rome is not a quiet city. It never truly sleeps. It breathes through noise, trade, ambition, gossip, and endless human activity. As evening approaches, another part of Roman life begins to awaken. People who have worked since dawn start searching for somewhere to rest. Travelers arriving after long journeys need food and shelter. Sailors coming from distant ports want a warm meal and a cup of wine. Soldiers returning from patrol wish to forget the weight of discipline for a few precious hours. Laborers exhausted from carrying stone, timber, and grain crave nothing more than a simple drink among familiar faces. Their destination is often the same, a Roman tavern. These establishments were far more than places to drink. They were crossroads where every level of society briefly collided. Rich merchants might sit only a few feet away from poor craftsmen. Foreign traders could exchange stories with local workers. News spread rapidly across wooden tables, stained by countless spilled cups of wine. Some entered seeking conversation. Others entered hoping to disappear. Many came carrying secrets. If the walls of these taverns could speak, they would tell stories filled with laughter, betrayal, love, violence, politics, fortune, and tragedy. To modernize, it is tempting to imagine Roman taverns as elegant wine bars, where people calmly discussed philosophy over expensive drinks. Reality was often much rougher. Many taverns were noisy, smoky, crowded, and filled with strong smells that mixed together into something unforgettable. Wine soaked into wooden counters. Cooking fires filled the rooms with smoke. Sweat from travelers mingled with the scent of roasted meat. Oil lamps flickered against plaster walls blackened by years of smoke. The floors were rarely clean. Dogs wandered between tables searching for scraps. Sometimes chickens even wandered indoors. Yet, despite these conditions, taverns remained among the most important social spaces in the Roman world. To understand ancient Rome, one must understand where ordinary Romans spent their evenings. History often remembers emperors. It celebrates victorious generals. It records famous speeches delivered in magnificent forums, but the true heartbeat of Rome often echoed inside its taverns. Here, ordinary people laughed. Here they complained. Here they celebrated births. Here they mourned deaths. Here they gambled away fortunes. Here friendships began. Here conspiracies quietly formed. A traveler arriving from distant Spain could hear news from Egypt before official announcements reached local authorities. Merchants learned which roads had become dangerous because of bandits. Sailors shared rumors about storms and pirate attacks. Soldiers spoke carefully about military campaigns, revealing just enough information to satisfy curious listeners without risking punishment. Information flowed through taverns almost as freely as wine itself. In many ways, these places served as the unofficial newspapers of the Roman world. One conversation could change someone's future. One rumor could destroy a reputation. One careless sentence could invite dangerous attention. Roman society depended heavily upon personal relationships. Without telephones, newspapers, or the internet, nearly everything spread through human conversation. The tavern became one of history's greatest communication networks. Even politics entered these rooms. Supporters of rival politicians argued passionately while cups slammed against wooden tables. Elections generated heated debates. Tax collectors became deeply unpopular topics. Military victories inspired patriotic celebrations. Not every discussion ended peacefully. Arguments fueled by alcohol could become violent with astonishing speed. Roman writers occasionally complained about drunken fights that erupted inside taverns. Broken cups, overturned benches, bloody noses, and bruised faces were not uncommon sights. Still, people returned, again and again. The attraction of the tavern was stronger than its dangers. Wine itself played an enormous role in this attraction. Unlike today, clean drinking water was not always easy to find in crowded urban neighborhoods. Romans certainly valued fresh water and built magnificent aqueducts to supply it. But wine became an everyday beverage across much of a society. It was usually mixed with water rather than consumed straight, creating a drink that varied greatly in strength depending upon personal taste and social custom. Drinking unmixed wine was often considered excessive or even uncivilized. A respectable Roman typically diluted it. Different wines came from different regions. Some were sweet, others sharp. Some aged beautifully, others spoiled quickly. The wealthy could afford exceptional vintages stored in carefully sealed containers. Poor workers often drank cheaper wines that were rough, sour, and heavily diluted. Quality differed dramatically, yet nearly everyone drank some form of wine. A tavern owner understood this reality better than anyone. Every morning preparations began long before customers arrived. Clay storage jars taller than a man stood against the walls, each holding valuable supplies of wine. Workers carefully transferred the liquid into smaller containers for serving throughout the day. Bread baked nearby. Cheese was sliced into manageable portions. Olives filled bowls waiting upon rough wooden shelves. Simple stews simmered over steady fires. Fish sauce, one of Rome's favorite seasonings, added its unmistakable aroma to many meals. Visitors expecting luxury often left disappointed. Most taverns specialized in practicality rather than elegance. Customers wanted affordable food served quickly. Time mattered, especially for laborers who needed to return home before darkness fully settled. Throughout the Roman Empire, taverns appeared in many forms. Some occupied tiny street corners. Others stood beside major highways, serving travelers. Busy ports contained establishments crowded almost every evening. Near military camps, taverns welcomed soldiers with reliable business. In prosperous neighborhoods, wealthier customers expected cleaner surroundings and better wine. In poorer districts, survival mattered more than comfort. The appearance changed. The purpose remained remarkably similar. People needed places where they could pause the endless demands of daily life. For a few hours, the burdens of work seemed lighter. A shared meal created temporary equality. Even strangers might exchange stories as though they had known one another for years. That simple human desire to gather together over food and drink is one of the oldest traditions in history. Ancient Roman taverns remind us that although civilizations rise and fall, human nature changes surprisingly little. 2,000 years separate us from those evenings beneath smoky ceilings lit by flickering oil lamps. Yet we still gather. We still celebrate. We still complain about work. We still laugh over meals. We still tell stories that grow slightly more dramatic with every cup. Perhaps that is why Roman taverns continue to fascinate historians today. They reveal emperors only indirectly. Instead, they introduce us to ordinary people, the people whose names history forgot. The baker who stopped for wine after selling his final loaf. The sailor grateful to survive another voyage. The widow earning a living by serving customers. The merchant calculating tomorrow's profits. The soldier uncertain whether he would ever return home. Together, they created the living soul of Rome. And every evening, as the streets slowly darkened beneath the fading Mediterranean sky, the doors of countless taverns opened once again, inviting another generation of Romans inside. Wine, food, and everyday customers. As the doors of a Roman tavern swung open each morning, the day began long before the first customer arrived. The owner, and any family members or workers, were already busy preparing for another cycle of business. Clay lamps that had burned late into the previous night were cleaned and refilled with oil. Wooden tables were wiped down as well as circumstances allowed. Large storage jars were checked to make sure there was enough wine for the coming hours. Bread was unpacked, vegetables sorted, and fires lit beneath cooking pots that would remain warm throughout the day. Unlike modern restaurants with lengthy menus, many Roman taverns served a fairly limited selection of food. Their purpose was not to impress wealthy diners with elaborate feasts, but to provide filling, affordable meals that could be prepared quickly. Most customers were ordinary people who worked hard and could not spend large amounts of money on luxury. Fresh bread was almost always available. Bread formed the foundation of daily life across the Roman world. Rich or poor, nearly everyone depended on it. Some loaves were soft and fresh, while others became hard after a day or two and were better suited for dipping into soup or wine. Alongside bread came olives, one of the Mediterranean's most valuable foods. They were easy to store, nutritious, and packed with flavor. Bowls of green and black olives often sat ready for hungry customers who wanted something simple while waiting for a larger meal. Cheese was another common companion. Made from sheep's or goat's milk in many regions, it could be eaten fresh or aged. A traveler stopping for a quick meal might receive a piece of coarse bread, several olives, and a slice of cheese, along with a cup of diluted wine. It was inexpensive, satisfying, and familiar. Vegetable stews simmered slowly throughout the day. Lentils, beans, onions, cabbage, leeks, and herbs were combined into hearty dishes that stretched limited ingredients to feed many people. Meat appeared less frequently than modern audiences often imagine. While pork, beef, lamb, and poultry certainly existed, they were not everyday foods for everyone.
For poorer Romans, meat could be an occasional treat rather than a daily expectation. Fish, however, played an important role in many parts of the empire, especially near the coast. Fresh catches reached taverns early in the morning, while salted or dried fish could be transported much farther inland. Fish also supplied one of Rome's most famous seasonings, garum. To modern noses, garum might seem unusual.
It was made by fermenting fish with salt until it produced a rich, liquid seasoning. Although the process sounded unpleasant, Romans loved it. They poured it over vegetables, meat, fish, eggs, and countless other dishes. Good quality garum could become surprisingly expensive, while cheaper versions found their way into ordinary taverns. Wine, however, remained the undisputed centerpiece of the Roman tavern. To understand Roman wine is to understand Roman society itself. Wine was not reserved for celebrations alone. It accompanied everyday life from morning until evening. Farmers drank it after working in the fields. Merchants drank it during business discussions. Sailors drank it after reaching port. Soldiers received wine as part of their regular provisions during many periods of Roman history. Yet Roman wine was different from the way many people enjoy wine today. Most Romans believed strong, undiluted wine should rarely be consumed by civilized people. Instead, wine was commonly mixed with water. The amount depended upon personal taste, local customs, and the occasion. Some preferred stronger mixtures, while others diluted the wine heavily. Cold water might be used during summer, warm water during winter. Sometimes herbs, spices, or honey were added to create different flavors. Expensive wines traveled across the empire from famous vineyards. Wealthy customers recognized regional differences much like modern wine enthusiasts. Certain harvests earned excellent reputations, while poor harvests disappointed buyers. A prosperous merchant visiting a respectable tavern might ask detailed questions about where a particular wine originated. A laborer finishing a difficult day usually cared about something much simpler. Was the wine affordable? Was there enough of it? For many ordinary Romans, those were the only questions that mattered. The customers themselves represented nearly every corner of Roman society. Construction workers often arrived covered in dust. Their muscles ached after lifting stone beneath the hot Mediterranean sun. They wanted food that filled empty stomachs and wine that eased tired bodies. Farmers visiting nearby towns stopped to rest before returning home. Their conversations centered on harvests, weather, livestock, and taxes. Merchants carried small bags filled with coins and spent much of their time discussing prices. Grain, olive oil, pottery, cloth, and imported goods all became subjects of endless negotiation. Deals begun in busy marketplaces frequently continued over cups of wine inside nearby taverns. Travelers brought something even more valuable than merchandise. They brought stories. A man arriving from Egypt might describe the bustling harbor of Alexandria. Someone from Gaul could speak about colder climates and unfamiliar customs. A sailor from Greece shared tales of dangerous storms and distant islands. Not every story was completely true. Some became larger with every telling. Sea monsters grew bigger. Bandits became more numerous. Treasures became richer. Victories became more glorious. Yet listeners rarely complained. Stories were entertainment. They transformed ordinary evenings into adventures. Soldiers were among the tavern's most recognizable visitors. Roman military life demanded strict discipline. Orders governed nearly every aspect of a soldier's existence.
taverns offered temporary freedom from constant supervision. Friends gathered together after duty, sharing meals while discussing difficult marches, demanding officers, and hopes for future rewards. Some soldiers dreamed of retirement and the land grants promised after years of faithful service. Others simply wanted to enjoy the present evening without worrying about tomorrow's responsibilities. Veterans often became respected storytellers. They had seen provinces that younger Romans could scarcely imagine. Britain with its cold rains, the deserts of North Africa, the forests beyond the Rhine, the mountains of the eastern frontier. Their experiences fascinated younger listeners, eager to hear about distant corners of the empire. Not everyone entered a tavern to socialize. Some preferred quiet corners where they could eat alone. Perhaps they were exhausted. Perhaps they carried private grief. Perhaps they wished to avoid being recognized. A widow earning her own living. A traveler missing family far away. A craftsman worried about unpaid debts. Every customer brought an invisible story that others could rarely see. The tavern accepted them all. Of course, not every visitor behaved well. Alcohol has always possessed the ability to loosen tongues and weaken judgment. Arguments sometimes erupted over games. Insults spoken in anger could quickly become fights. Political disagreements divided neighbors. Business negotiations collapsed into shouting matches. Owners learned to recognize trouble before it exploded. Experienced tavern keepers understood their regular customers. They knew who became friendly after drinking, and they knew who became dangerous. Some problems could be calmed with patience. Others required strong friends willing to separate angry men before serious injuries occurred. Despite these occasional conflicts, many taverns developed loyal communities. Regular customers returned night after night. Friendships formed naturally. People celebrated marriages together. They mourned lost relatives together. They welcomed travelers. They exchanged advice. In a city as enormous as Rome itself, such familiar places offered a sense of belonging that could otherwise be difficult to find. For newcomers arriving in the capital with few connections, a neighborhood tavern often became the first place where names were learned and friendships began. The owner might introduce one customer to another. A merchant could recommend work to a laborer. A traveler might receive directions or warnings about dangerous neighborhoods. Simple conversations sometimes changed lives. This ordinary human interaction rarely appears in official historical records. Emperors left inscriptions. Generals commissioned monuments. Senators wrote speeches. Ordinary tavern conversations disappeared into history. Yet they shaped daily life just as surely as imperial decrees. Behind every great empire stand millions of ordinary people whose names history never preserved. The Roman tavern belonged to them. It belonged to the baker carrying flour beneath his fingernails, to the sailor smelling of salt water, to the blacksmith with soot covering his hands, to the merchant counting worn bronze coins, to the widow determined to survive, to the traveler chasing opportunity, to the soldier hoping to see home again. Every cup of wine raised inside those smoky rooms became part of a larger story. A story not only about food and drink, but about humanity itself. Because wherever people gather around a shared table, they exchange more than meals. They exchange trust. They exchange memories. They exchange hope. And in the ancient Roman world,
Few places witnessed those exchanges more often than the humble tavern. Taverns, travelers, and the roads that connected the Roman Empire. Long before railways, airplanes, or automobiles, the Roman Empire was connected by one of the greatest road systems the ancient world had ever seen. Stretching for tens of thousands of miles, Roman roads crossed mountains, forests, deserts, fertile valleys, and rugged coastlines. They linked distant provinces to the capital and transformed an enormous empire into a network through which soldiers, merchants, officials, pilgrims, and ordinary travelers could move with remarkable efficiency. For every road, there were people, and wherever people traveled, taverns followed. Some stood just outside city gates, welcoming those arriving after days of exhausting travel. Others appeared beside busy highways where travelers desperately needed food, water, and rest before continuing their journeys. Near river crossings, mountain passes, and important intersections, taverns became familiar landmarks the generations of travelers came to recognize. For many Romans, spotting the sign of a tavern after hours of walking was one of the day's greatest comforts. A journey across the empire was rarely easy. Even with Rome's impressive engineering, travel demanded patience and endurance. Dust coated clothing during the dry season. Heavy rain turned parts of the roads muddy and slippery. Summer heat exhausted both people and animals, while winter storms made mountain routes dangerous. Horses, mules, and donkeys required constant care, and wagons often broke wheels or axles far from the nearest town. By sunset, travelers were usually tired, hungry, and eager to stop. The warm glow of oil lamps shining through an open doorway promised relief. Inside, familiar sounds greeted every newcomer. The scrape of wooden benches across stone floors, the crackling of fire beneath a cooking pot, the murmur of conversation spoken in different accents, the clink of clay cups raised in celebration or simple relief. For someone who had spent the entire day on the road, these ordinary sounds felt welcoming. Travelers came from every corner of the empire. A merchant from Hispania might be carrying fine olive oil destined for markets in Rome. A trader from Egypt could be transporting rolls of papyrus or precious glassware. A craftsman from Gaul might hope to find new customers in distant cities. Government officials carried messages that affected entire provinces. Tax collectors traveled with documents and records. Engineers inspected roads, bridges, and aqueducts. Doctors journeyed to towns where their skills were needed. Actors and musicians moved from city to city, entertaining audiences wherever opportunities appeared. Each person carried not only luggage, but also news. This made roadside taverns valuable centers of information. Long before newspapers existed, travelers served as living messengers. A merchant arriving from the east might report that grain prices had risen. Another traveler could warn of bandits attacking wagons along a particular road. Someone else might describe political unrest in a distant province or celebrate a recent military victory announced in another city. These conversations spread rapidly. One evening's discussion in a roadside tavern might become common knowledge hundreds of miles away within weeks. Rumors traveled almost as quickly as facts. Sometimes they were accurate. Sometimes they were wildly exaggerated. An ordinary robbery became a tale of hundreds of armed bandits. A minor political disagreement transformed into rumors of rebellion.
A difficult storm at sea grew into stories of entire fleets disappearing beneath monstrous waves. Yet people listened carefully. Information, even uncertain information, could mean the difference between profit and disaster. Merchants especially depended upon reliable news. Knowing which roads remained safe could protect valuable cargo. Learning where markets needed certain goods allowed traders to earn greater profits. If grain harvests had failed in one region, prices might soon rise. If a bridge had collapsed, alternative routes became necessary. A simple conversation over wine could shape an entire business journey. Not every traveler was wealthy. Many walked enormous distances carrying little more than a small bundle of possessions. Pilgrims visited temples seeking blessings from the gods. Former soldiers searched for new opportunities after completing military service. Young men hoped to find employment in larger cities. Families relocated in search of better lives. Their journeys were filled with uncertainty. A tavern offered temporary shelter from that uncertainty. Sometimes travelers slept inside if space allowed. Larger establishments occasionally rented simple rooms. These accommodations were rarely luxurious. Beds often consisted of straw mattresses laid upon wooden frames. Blankets were basic. Privacy was limited. Several strangers might share the same sleeping area. Yet after spending days exposed to rain, wind, or relentless sunshine, even a modest bed felt welcome. Travelers quickly learned that not every tavern deserved a good reputation. Some owners were honest. Others saw exhausted strangers as easy opportunities for profit. Complaints about watered-down wine, poor quality food, inflated prices, or missing belongings appeared even in ancient writings. The reputation of a tavern mattered greatly. Word spread along the roads. Travelers remembered where they had been treated fairly. They also remembered where they had been cheated. Recommendations passed from one traveler to another became valuable guides. If you stop near the next bridge, choose the second tavern instead of the first. The owner there serves better food. The wine is stronger. The beds are cleaner. Simple advice like this circulated constantly. Animals were just as important as their owners. A traveler could not continue without healthy horses or mules. Many roadside taverns therefore included stables where animals could rest, drink water, and receive fresh feed. Stable workers checked hooves, replaced worn horseshoes when necessary, and helped prepare animals for another day's journey. A wise traveler cared for his animals before thinking about his own comfort. Without them, the road could become impossible. As darkness settled over the countryside, taverns took on a different atmosphere. Outside, the roads grew quiet. Only the occasional late traveler disturbed the silence. Inside, however, life continued. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows across plaster walls. The smell of roasting meat mixed with wood smoke and wine. Voices rose and fell as strangers shared stories from places most listeners would never visit. Someone described the towering temples of Egypt. Another spoke about snow-covered mountains far to the north. A sailor recalled seeing dolphins racing beside his ship. An old veteran remembered battles fought decades earlier. Children who lived at the tavern listened carefully. For them, every evening became a lesson about the wider world. Long before maps hung on classroom walls, these conversations painted vivid pictures of distant lands. A child growing up beside a Roman road might never leave home. Yet through travelers, that child could imagine deserts stretching beyond the horizon, forests so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground, cities larger than anything nearby,
and seas that seemed endless. Taverns became windows into an empire of astonishing diversity. Languages blended together. Latin dominated much of the Western Empire. Greek remained widely spoken in the East. Travelers from different provinces brought their own accents, expressions, and traditions. Although communication was not always perfect, commerce and shared human experience often bridged the gaps. A smile required no translation. Neither did kindness, nor did hunger, nor the relief of finally reaching shelter after a difficult day. Of course, the roads carried danger as well as opportunity. Bandits lurked in isolated regions. Some targeted wealthy merchants transporting valuable goods. Others robbed anyone unfortunate enough to travel alone. Stories about highway robberies became common topics. Inside taverns, travelers compared routes, discussed suspicious areas, and occasionally joined together for safety during the next stage of their journeys. There was strength in numbers. A lone traveler appeared vulnerable. A group inspired greater confidence. Roman authorities worked hard to keep major roads secure. Soldiers patrolled important routes, and local officials attempted to discourage crime. Even so, complete safety remained impossible across such a vast empire. The road demanded caution. Experienced travelers trusted their instincts. They avoided unnecessary risks, and they appreciated every peaceful evening spent beneath the roof of a welcoming tavern. When dawn finally arrived, the cycle began again. The stable doors opened, animals were saddled, wagons loaded. Travelers finished the last pieces of bread left from breakfast. The tavern owner accepted payment, offered directions, and wished customers a safe journey. Then, one by one, they returned to the road. Some would never pass that way again. Others became familiar faces who returned every season. The road remembered them all. So did the tavern. For while emperors measured Rome's greatness through conquest and monuments, ordinary people experienced the empire one journey at a time, and between every beginning and every destination stood the roadside tavern, a place where strangers became companions, where news traveled faster than official messengers, and where every traveler, no matter how far from home, could find a warm meal, a cup of wine, and the comforting reminder that they were not alone on the long roads of the Roman world. Gambling, entertainment, and the nightlife of ancient Roman taverns. As daylight slowly disappeared behind the rooftops of Rome, the city began to change. The frantic pace of business eased, market stalls closed one by one, and craftsmen packed away their tools after long hours of work. The streets did not become silent, however. Instead, they transformed into a different kind of world, one illuminated by flickering oil lamps, filled with distant laughter, echoing footsteps, and the familiar voices drifting from the city's countless taverns. Night belonged to a different Rome. The senators had finished many of their official duties. Merchants had counted the day's earnings. Laborers had finally rested their aching backs. Travelers who had reached the city before sunset were searching for food and conversation. The taverns became brighter than the streets outside. Warm light spilled through open doorways, inviting people inside. The smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, herbs, smoke, and wine drifted into the evening air. For many Romans, These sights and smells signaled that the day's responsibilities had ended, at least for a few precious hours. The atmosphere inside a tavern at night was very different from the quieter hours of the morning. Voices grew louder. Laughter came more easily. Conversations overlapped until the room became a constant hum of human activity. Clay cups struck wooden tables as customers toasted one another. Someone called for another jug of wine while another group argued passionately about politics, business, or the outcome of a recent chariot race. Not every evening unfolded the same way. Some nights remained calm and friendly. Others became unforgettable. Entertainment in Roman taverns rarely required elaborate performances. The customers themselves often created the evening's excitement. Storytelling was perhaps the oldest form of amusement. A traveler who had crossed distant provinces could gather an audience within minutes. People leaned closer as tales of dangerous mountain roads, violent storms at sea, or magnificent foreign cities filled the smoky room. Sometimes the stories were truthful. Sometimes imagination quietly improved them. A small group of thieves became an army of ruthless bandits. A rough sea became a battle against impossible waves. An ordinary merchant became the hero of an extraordinary adventure. Few listeners objected. The purpose was not perfect accuracy. The purpose was entertainment. Songs also echoed through many taverns. Some customers sang together after several cups of wine. Others knew popular tunes that nearly everyone recognized. Sailors often carried songs learned in distant ports. Soldiers marched to rhythmic chants during military service and sometimes sang them again in moments of celebration. The quality of the singing varied greatly. Some possessed beautiful voices. Others possessed only enthusiasm. After enough wine, few people noticed the difference. Music frequently accompanied these gatherings. Simple instruments such as flutes, small drums, or stringed instruments could appear during festive evenings. Professional musicians occasionally performed in busier establishments, especially in larger cities where competition for customers was strong. A lively tavern attracted attention. People passing outside often entered simply because they heard laughter and music spilling into the street. Then there was gambling. Perhaps no form of entertainment attracted as much excitement or caused as much trouble. Romans loved games of chance. Dice were especially popular. Small cubes made from bone, ivory, wood, or other materials rolled across wooden tables countless times each evening. The rules of individual games varied, but the excitement remained the same. Fortune could change with a single throw. Coins passed quickly from one hand to another. Small wagers often grew larger as confidence increased. A player who won several rounds believed luck would never leave. A player who lost insisted that the next throw would surely change everything. Human nature has changed very little over the centuries. The emotions surrounding gambling remain remarkably familiar. Hope, greed, confidence, desperation, regret, all could appear within a single evening. Roman authorities had complicated attitudes toward gambling. Certain forms were restricted or discouraged during much of the year, though exceptions existed, especially during festivals. Despite legal limitations, gambling remained widespread. Laws proved easier to write than to enforce. Inside busy taverns, games continued, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly. Owners often understood exactly what was happening.
As long as disputes remained manageable and customers continued buying food and wine, many preferred not to interfere. Unfortunately, gambling and alcohol formed a dangerous combination. Arguments erupted when players accused one another of cheating. Loaded dice occasionally appeared. Hidden tricks led to angry accusations. Coins scattered across tables as shouting replaced laughter. Friends became enemies within moments. Experienced tavern keepers learned to recognize the warning signs: raised voices, clenched fists, men standing too quickly from their benches. These small changes often signaled that violence was approaching. Sometimes calm words solved the problem. Sometimes stronger measures became necessary. Fights were an unavoidable part of tavern life. Most began over surprisingly small matters: an insult, a spilled drink, a disputed wager, a careless shove in a crowded room. Pride often mattered more than the original disagreement. Among many Roman men, allowing an insult to pass unanswered could be seen as weakness. As a result, arguments escalated rapidly. Punches were thrown, benches overturned, clay cups shattered against stone floors. The evening's cheerful atmosphere disappeared in seconds. Other customers usually reacted quickly. Some attempted to separate the fighters. Others watched with fascination. A few quietly moved their own drinks out of harm's way before continuing to observe. Eventually, the disturbance ended. Bruised faces, bloody noses, broken furniture. Then, remarkably, life often returned to normal. Fresh wine was poured, conversations resumed, the tavern carried on. Nightlife in Rome extended far beyond drinking. It was also a time when news spread most rapidly. During daylight hours, people remained busy with work. Evening allowed them to talk. Political rumors traveled from table to table. Merchants exchanged information about changing prices. Travelers described conditions on distant roads. Soldiers hinted at military movements without revealing official secrets. No formal announcement was necessary. A single conversation overheard in one corner of the room could become common knowledge by the following morning. This made taverns valuable sources of information. It also made them dangerous places for careless speech. Loose words had consequences. Criticizing powerful officials in the wrong company could attract unwanted attention. An unknown stranger listening quietly in the corner might remember every sentence. No one could be entirely certain who was listening. Despite these risks, people continued talking. Wine encouraged honesty, sometimes too much honesty. The evening also revealed another side of Roman society: loneliness. Not everyone entered a tavern surrounded by friends. Some arrived alone because they had no family nearby. Others had recently lost loved ones. Travelers often spent weeks separated from home. A simple conversation with strangers helped ease that isolation. A shared meal reminded people that they belonged somewhere, even if only for a single evening. This quiet sense of companionship became one of the tavern's greatest gifts. It welcomed people regardless of where they had begun their journey. As midnight approached, the atmosphere changed once again. Some customers had already gone home. Others remained, speaking more softly than before. The fires burned lower. Oil lamps flickered as their fuel slowly disappeared. Outside, Rome grew quieter. The sounds of wagons and busy markets had vanished. Only distant footsteps echoed through the narrow streets. Eventually, even the liveliest tavern prepared to close. The owner counted the day's earnings. Empty wine jars were replaced,
broken cups swept aside. Tables wiped clean enough to welcome another day's customers. Those who had enjoyed fortunate evenings walked home smiling. Those who had lost money or pride returned with heavier hearts. Yet most would come back. Because the Roman tavern offered something difficult to find elsewhere. It offered escape. For a few hours, worries about work, debt, politics, and uncertain futures faded beneath laughter, stories, music, games, and shared cups of wine. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, but tonight belonged to friendship, fortune, and the unpredictable magic of Roman nightlife. And beneath the glow of oil lamps, while the great city slept around them, the taverns continued to preserve the ordinary moments that made ancient Rome feel alive. Crime, secrets, and hidden deals. Inside ancient Roman taverns, when most people think of an ancient Roman tavern, they imagine laughter, flowing wine, hearty meals, and travelers exchanging stories. Those things certainly existed, but they were only part of the picture. As darkness settled over the streets and the crowds grew thicker, another side of tavern life quietly emerged. It was a world of whispered conversations, hidden bargains, carefully guarded secrets, and sometimes dangerous crimes. A tavern was one of the few places where strangers gathered without attracting much attention. Merchants, sailors, laborers, soldiers, travelers, entertainers, and local residents all shared the same room. People arrived and left constantly. Faces changed every hour. That constant movement created opportunity. For honest people, it meant new friendships and business. For dishonest people, it offered something even more valuable: anonymity. A thief could sit quietly in the corner, studying the room without raising suspicion. He watched who carried heavy purses, who had been drinking too much, and who appeared unfamiliar with the city. Travelers were often the easiest targets. After days or even weeks on the road, they arrived exhausted. Many carried their savings with them because banks, as we know them today, did not exist in the same way. Coins were hidden inside leather pouches, sewn into clothing tucked beneath belts, or stored inside travel bags. An experienced thief knew exactly where to look. He also knew that a tired traveler might not notice a missing purse until the following morning. Pickpockets became especially active when taverns grew crowded. A friendly stranger might accidentally bump into someone while reaching for a drink. Another offered to help a traveler who appeared lost. Someone else distracted the victim with conversation while an accomplice quietly removed a coin pouch. The theft itself often lasted only seconds. By the time the victim realized what had happened, the criminal had already disappeared into the busy streets of Rome. Not every crime relied on stealth. Confidence tricksters operated with remarkable skill. One man claimed to know of an incredible business opportunity. Another promised access to rare imported goods. Some offered magical charms said to guarantee wealth or protection from bad luck. Others claimed to possess secret knowledge about the future. Desperate people have always been willing to believe extraordinary promises. Ancient Rome was no exception. The tavern provided fertile ground for deception because customers were relaxed, distracted, and often influenced by alcohol. Wine made conversations easier. It also made poor decisions more likely. Business deals were another common feature of tavern life. Many were completely honest. Merchants discussed shipments of grain, olive oil, wine, pottery, textiles, or livestock. Prices were negotiated over shared meals. Partnerships formed between people who had only recently met. A successful agreement might begin with nothing more than two strangers sitting at neighboring tables. Trust developed gradually. One conversation became several. A handshake sealed an understanding. In a world without instant communication, personal reputation meant everything. If a merchant earned a reputation for honesty, business naturally increased. If he became known as dishonest, word spread surprisingly fast. The Roman world was enormous, but news traveled efficiently through the people themselves. A dishonest trader might discover that buyers in another city had already heard about his behavior. The tavern functioned as a marketplace for information as much as for food and drink. Not every hidden meeting involved commerce. Politics often unfolded quietly behind ordinary conversations. Rome was a society deeply shaped by ambition. Men competed for public office. Powerful families built alliances. Supporters gathered to discuss upcoming elections, legal disputes, or government decisions. Most of these discussions remained peaceful, some did not. History reminds us that political conspiracies rarely begin inside magnificent palaces. They often begin in ordinary rooms where people believe no one important is listening. A crowded tavern provided exactly that illusion. Voices blended together. Laughter covered quieter conversations. People assumed their words disappeared into the noise. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they were terribly mistaken. Informants existed throughout Roman society. Certain individuals quietly listened for information that powerful officials might find useful. Some worked for local authorities. Others hoped to earn rewards by reporting suspicious behavior. No customer could ever be completely certain who might repeat a private conversation elsewhere. This uncertainty encouraged caution. Wise Romans learned to measure every word, especially after several cups of wine. Smugglers also found taverns useful. The Roman Empire taxed many goods. Avoiding those taxes could produce enormous profits. Illegal shipments sometimes changed hands after sunset when fewer officials watched the streets. A merchant might appear to be enjoying an ordinary evening meal. In reality, he was arranging the movement of untaxed goods through hidden routes. Wine itself occasionally became part of these schemes. Expensive vintages were mixed with cheaper varieties before being sold to unsuspecting buyers. Labels describing famous vineyards could be attached to ordinary wine. Fraud is far older than many people imagine. Where money existed, deception usually followed. Counterfeit coins created another serious problem. Roman coins depended upon public trust. If false coins entered circulation, that trust weakened. Skilled counterfeiters attempted to imitate official currency using cheaper metals coated with thin layers of silver. Busy taverns became convenient places to spend such coins before anyone noticed the difference. By the time a counterfeit coin was discovered, the criminal was long gone. Some taverns earned reputations that respectable citizens preferred to avoid. Parents warned their children about certain neighborhoods after dark. Travelers received advice about establishments known for violence or theft. Even Roman writers occasionally described particular taverns as dangerous places where drunkenness, gambling, and criminal activity flourished. Of course, not every frightening story reflected reality. Rumors often exaggerated the dangers. A single violent incident might permanently damage a tavern's reputation. Fear spread quickly. Facts sometimes struggled to keep pace. Violence remained a genuine concern. Disagreements that began over gambling or insults occasionally ended with knives being drawn. Roman law punished serious crimes, but preventing them entirely proved impossible. Tavern owners therefore faced difficult choices. They wanted lively businesses that attracted customers. They also wanted safe environments where people would return. Many developed relationships with local guards or respected members of the neighborhood. If trouble became frequent, authorities eventually paid attention. A wise owner understood that protecting customers also protected the business. Yet despite these darker realities, most evenings passed without serious crime. Most customers simply wanted a warm meal, decent wine, and pleasant company. They laughed, shared stories, made plans, discussed tomorrow's work, celebrated birthdays, welcomed old friends, said farewell to travelers continuing their journeys. The ordinary moments greatly outnumbered the dangerous ones. Still, the possibility of mystery lingered beneath the surface. A stranger entering quietly, a whispered conversation ending abruptly as someone approached, a small leather pouch exchanged beneath the table, a nervous glance toward the doorway. Such moments reminded everyone that a Roman tavern reflected the city itself, full of opportunity, full of risk, full of ambition, full of secrets. Every customer carried a visible face and an invisible story. Some stories involved honest work. Others involved hidden motives that no one else could see. Perhaps that is why taverns remain so fascinating to historians. They reveal not only how Romans ate and drank, but how they trusted, doubted, cooperated, competed, and sometimes betrayed one another. Within those smoke-darkened walls, the entire spectrum of human behavior unfolded night after night. The noble and the dishonest, the generous and the greedy, the hopeful and the desperate. All gathered beneath the same roof, all shared the same wine, and all contributed to the endlessly complex life of the ancient Roman tavern, women, families, and the people who ran ancient Roman taverns. When people imagine an ancient Roman tavern, they often picture noisy rooms filled with men drinking wine, arguing over politics, or gambling with dice. While scenes like these certainly existed, they tell only part of the story. Behind every successful tavern stood people whose work rarely appeared in history books. The tavern did not run itself. Long before the first customer stepped through the doorway, and long after the last one stumbled into the quiet streets, someone was working. Someone was cleaning. Someone was cooking. Someone was counting coins. Someone was worrying about tomorrow's supplies. Many Roman taverns were family businesses. Unlike the grand villas owned by wealthy aristocrats, these establishments often combined work and home under a single roof. The ground floor served customers throughout the day, while the owner and family might sleep in small rooms above or behind the main dining area. Life and business blended together. Children grew up surrounded by the sounds of conversation, laughter, arguments, and the steady rhythm of everyday commerce. They learned their family's trade almost as soon as they could walk. A young boy might help carry water or stack firewood. A young girl might assist in preparing bread, cleaning tables, or serving simple meals. What began as small chores slowly became lifelong skills. Many children eventually inherited the business, continuing a tradition that had supported their family for years. The tavern was more than a workplace. It was home. Every morning began before sunrise. The fires had to be lit, fresh water carried inside, bread prepared, wine jars checked, vegetables washed,
cooking pots cleaned. There were no days when the work simply stopped. If the tavern closed unexpectedly, customers would find another place to eat and drink. Loyalty mattered. So did reliability. The owner carried enormous responsibility. He negotiated with suppliers, purchased food, maintained the building, settled disputes among customers, and ensured there was enough wine to meet demand. A poor harvest or a delayed shipment could quickly create financial problems. If business slowed for several weeks, the family suffered alongside the tavern. Profit was never guaranteed. Women played a far greater role in tavern life than many people realize. Although Roman society often placed legal and social authority in the hands of men, women worked in countless businesses across the empire. Taverns were no exception. Many wives managed daily operations alongside their husbands. They supervised cooking, welcomed customers, handled payments, and kept careful track of supplies. If a husband traveled to purchase goods or became ill, his wife might oversee the entire establishment herself. In some cases, women owned taverns independently. This happened especially after becoming widows. Rather than selling the business, many continued operating it to support themselves and their children. Running a tavern demanded intelligence, resilience, and practical skill. Every decision affected the family's survival. How much wine should be purchased? Would customers prefer more bread or more stew this week? Could repairs to the roof wait another month? Should prices rise after a poor harvest? These were everyday questions with no easy answers. Roman inscriptions occasionally preserve the names of women connected to taverns and inns, offering brief glimpses into lives that official histories largely ignored. Unlike emperors or generals, these women left behind no great speeches or monuments. Instead, they left evidence of ordinary perseverance. Their work kept businesses alive. Serving customers required remarkable patience. Most visitors behaved respectfully. Some did not. Alcohol sometimes transformed polite conversations into loud arguments. An experienced tavern keeper learned to recognize changing moods. A customer speaking too loudly, another reaching too quickly for another man's dice. Someone becoming increasingly angry over a disputed payment. Small warning signs often appeared before larger problems. Good owners developed calm authority. They understood when to intervene, when to ignore harmless disagreements, and when to insist that someone leave before violence erupted. This balance was never easy. Every customer represented income. Yet one dangerous customer could frighten away many others. The success of a tavern depended not only upon food and wine, but also upon reputation. Families also faced personal sacrifices. Because customers arrived from morning until late at night, private life became difficult. Children completed lessons or chores while strangers filled the dining room. Meals were interrupted by new arrivals. Conversations paused whenever someone called for service. Even festivals brought extra work rather than rest. When everyone else celebrated, tavern families became busier than ever. Large public holidays drew enormous crowds. Wine flowed constantly. Food disappeared almost as quickly as it could be prepared. The work was exhausting. Yet successful festivals also produced valuable income. A profitable celebration might help support the family through quieter seasons. Behind every smiling welcome stood countless hours of unseen labor. Cleaning alone required constant attention. Clay cups broke frequently. Wine stained tables and floors,
Ash collected around cooking fires, smoke darkened walls and ceilings. Food scraps attracted insects and animals if left unattended. There were no modern cleaning products, only determination and hard work. The smell of the tavern became part of everyday life. Fresh bread, roasting meat, olive oil, wood smoke, spilled wine, herbs, wet wool from travelers caught in the rain, dust carried in from the roads. Together, these scents formed an atmosphere unique to places where people gathered from every walk of life. Families learned to live within it. The tavern also introduced children to an extraordinary variety of people. Unlike youngsters raised in isolated farms or wealthy estates, tavern children encountered merchants from distant provinces, sailors returning from long voyages, soldiers marching across the empire, government officials, craftsmen, entertainers, and pilgrims. Each customer carried stories. Some spoke of snowy mountains. Others described vast deserts. Some recalled dangerous sea voyages. Others talked about magnificent cities beyond the horizon. Without leaving home, these children gained an education in geography, language, and human nature. They learned that the Roman Empire stretched far beyond their own neighborhood. Regular customers often became extended family. The baker stopped every evening after work. The blacksmith arrived every third day. The retired soldier preferred the same table near the doorway. The merchant always asked about the latest travelers. Over time, these familiar faces created a sense of community. People celebrated weddings together. They mourned deaths together. They welcomed newborn children. They comforted neighbors during difficult times. The tavern became more than a business. It became part of the neighborhood's social fabric. Even pets played their role. Dogs frequently lived around taverns, guarding the property and eagerly accepting scraps from generous customers. Cats hunted mice attracted by stored grain. Their presence was practical rather than decorative. Protecting food supplies mattered. Every loaf of bread lost to pests reduced the family's income. Financial uncertainty remained constant. A successful week could be followed by several poor ones. Storms delayed travelers. Wars disrupted trade. Disease reduced the number of customers. Fires destroyed buildings with terrifying speed. No family could predict the future. They adapted as best they could. This quiet resilience defined countless ordinary Romans. History often celebrates spectacular achievements, magnificent temples, triumphal arches, military victories. Yet civilizations survive because the ordinary people wake each morning and perform necessary work. The tavern families were among those people. They welcomed strangers, fed the hungry, offered shelter to travelers, listened to endless stories, resolved arguments, balanced accounts, repaired furniture, swept floors, prepared tomorrow's meals before today's work had fully ended. Their names may have disappeared from history, but their contribution to Roman life was enormous. Without them, the roads would have felt lonelier, travel more difficult, neighborhoods less connected. The Roman tavern was not simply built from stone, timber, and clay. It was built upon the dedication of families whose daily labor transformed an ordinary building into a place where people could eat, rest, laugh, argue, celebrate, and briefly forget the burdens of life. And every evening, as another fire was lit and another jug of wine was opened, those families quietly prepared to welcome whoever might walk through the door next. Soldiers, politics, spies, and the hidden power of ancient Roman taverns.
By the time the evening fires were burning and the streets of Rome began to grow dark, another kind of customer often arrived at the tavern. Unlike weary farmers or merchants returning from the marketplace, these men carried themselves differently. Their backs were straight, their movements disciplined, and even after hours of marching, there was a confidence that came from years of military training. They were Roman soldiers. To most people, they represented the strength of the empire. They defended borders, protected roads, guarded cities, and enforced the authority of Rome across 3 continents. But once their duties ended for the day, they became ordinary men. They wanted warm food, a cup of wine, a comfortable place to sit, and perhaps for a few hours, a chance to forget the hardships of military life. The Roman army was one of the most organized fighting forces the ancient world had ever known. Discipline governed nearly every moment of a soldier's life. Orders were expected to be followed immediately. Training was relentless. Long marches tested endurance. Fortifications had to be built wherever the army camped, even after exhausting days on the road. Freedom was limited. The tavern offered something rare: choice. Here, a soldier could decide where to sit, what to eat, and with whom to spend the evening. Groups of comrades often entered together, laughing as they removed dusty cloaks and laid down heavy equipment beside their benches. Their conversations usually began with familiar subjects: the difficult march that morning, the strict centurion who demanded perfection, the quality of the latest food rations, the endless repairs required inside the military camp. To outsiders, these discussions sounded ordinary. To fellow soldiers, they were part of a shared life that few civilians truly understood. Veterans often became the center of attention. Years of service had carried them across enormous distances. Some had marched through the forests of Germania, where towering trees blocked much of the sunlight. Others had crossed the scorching deserts of Syria and Egypt. Some had guarded the windswept frontiers of Britain, where cold rain seemed endless. Every campaign left memories. Some were filled with pride, others with sorrow. Victory brought celebration. Loss left scars that remained long after the battles had ended. Many soldiers preferred not to speak about those darker memories. Instead, they told stories that entertained. A dangerous river crossing, a humorous mistake made by a young recruit, an encounter with unusual customs in distant provinces. The tavern allowed difficult experiences to become stories shared among friends. Travelers listened with fascination. Few ordinary Romans would ever see the distant lands described by these veterans. For them, the tavern became a window into the farthest reaches of the empire. Yet soldiers were not the only people interested in gathering information. Politics flowed through Roman taverns almost as freely as wine. Rome was a republic before it became an empire, and even under the emperors, political discussion remained part of everyday life. Elections, public offices, tax policies, military campaigns, and decisions made by powerful officials all affected ordinary citizens. People talked constantly. A merchant complained about new taxes. A craftsman argued that local officials favored wealthy families. Another customer praised the emperor for repairing roads or improving public buildings. Someone else quietly disagreed. Most of these conversations remained peaceful. Some became heated. Wine had a way of strengthening opinions. Voices rose.
Hands struck tables for emphasis. Friends found themselves arguing passionately over questions neither could truly answer. Despite the disagreements, these debates revealed something important. Romans cared deeply about their government. Even those with little political power followed events closely because the decisions of distant leaders shaped everyday life. Taverns became informal meeting places where ideas spread from one neighborhood to another. A rumor whispered in the capital might reach distant provinces through travelers within weeks. Political supporters sometimes arranged gatherings inside familiar taverns. There, away from official government buildings, they discussed strategies, alliances, and public opinion. Not every meeting involved conspiracy. Many simply involved ordinary citizens trying to understand the rapidly changing world around them. Still, where politics existed, suspicion often followed. The Roman government understood that information possessed enormous value. Knowing what soldiers thought, knowing what merchants discussed, knowing whether unrest was growing inside a city. All of this mattered. For that reason, historians believe that officials occasionally relied upon informants. These individuals blended easily into crowded public places. They appeared to be ordinary customers enjoying food and wine. In reality, they listened far more than they spoke. A careless remark criticizing an important official might travel farther than its speaker ever expected. Most Romans never knew whether someone nearby might be quietly remembering every word. This uncertainty encouraged caution. Experienced travelers often avoided discussing sensitive subjects with strangers. Wise merchants kept business secrets private. Veteran soldiers understood that revealing military information could bring severe punishment. Not every spy served the government. Business rivals also sought information. A merchant hoping to undercut a competitor wanted to know future prices. Smugglers watched for signs of increased inspections. Criminals listened for wealthy travelers carrying valuable goods. The tavern gathered people together. With them came opportunity. Some opportunities were honest, others were dangerous. Imagine a crowded evening inside a busy tavern near the center of Rome. At one table, retired soldiers remember campaigns fought decades earlier. Nearby, two grain merchants quietly negotiate the price of next month's shipment. In another corner, travelers from distant provinces describe roads damaged by recent storms. Beside the fire, a local politician speaks confidently about upcoming elections. Near the doorway sits a quiet stranger who says very little. No one pays him much attention, yet he hears almost everything. That single room contains dozens of conversations happening at once. To an ordinary visitor, it is simply another busy evening. To someone searching for valuable information, it is a treasure. Messages were not always spoken aloud. Sometimes they appeared in coded phrases. A merchant might discuss extra barrels when referring to something entirely different. Meeting times were arranged carefully. Certain customers arrived only after sunset. Others chose specific tables where conversations could not easily be overheard. The more valuable the information, the greater the effort taken to protect it. Despite these hidden activities, most evenings remained ordinary. Neighbors gathered after work. Families celebrated special occasions. Travelers rested tired feet. Children carried bread from the kitchen to waiting customers. The laughter filling the room usually had nothing to do with politics or espionage. It came from simple human companionship. That ordinary life is important to remember. History often focuses on dramatic conspiracies and famous events. Yet those moments were rare. Far more common were evenings filled with stories, jokes, shared meals, and friendships that lasted for years. The hidden power of the Roman tavern did not come only from secret meetings or political discussions. Its true power came from connection. It brought together people who otherwise would never have met. A soldier could speak with a merchant, a sailor with a blacksmith, a traveler with a local farmer. Ideas crossed social boundaries. News moved from province to province. Friendships ignored differences in birthplace. And the empire itself became stronger because its people remained connected through countless ordinary conversations. In that sense, every tavern became something far greater than a place to drink wine. It became part of the invisible network that held the Roman world together. Stone roads carried people across the empire. Ships carried goods across the sea. But taverns carried something equally important. They carried information, trust, rumors, hope, fear, and the countless conversations that quietly shaped history, one cup of wine at a time. Religion, superstitions, omens, and the mysterious beliefs found inside ancient Roman taverns. As night settled over the Roman world and the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the rooftops, the atmosphere inside many taverns changed once again. The loud business of the day faded into quieter conversations. The fires burned steadily, oil lamps cast long shadows across the walls, and outside the streets became calm enough that distant footsteps could be heard echoing between stone buildings. It was during these quieter hours that another side of Roman life often emerged. Not politics, not business, but belief. The ancient Romans were practical people in many ways. They built magnificent roads, engineered towering aqueducts, and governed one of history's greatest empires. Yet alongside this remarkable practicality existed a deep belief that unseen forces influenced everyday life. The gods were everywhere, in the sky, in the sea, in the forests, at crossroads, inside homes, and in the minds of many Romans, even within the walls of an ordinary tavern. Few people began a dangerous journey without first asking for divine protection. Sailors prayed before boarding ships. Soldiers offered sacrifices before military campaigns. Farmers looked to the heavens for signs of favorable weather. Merchants hoped the gods would bless profitable business. Even tavern owners sometimes believed that success depended upon more than hard work alone. A small shrine might stand quietly near the entrance or inside a corner of the building. It was rarely grand, perhaps only a small niche in the wall holding a simple figurine of a household deity. A tiny oil lamp burned nearby. Fresh flowers might occasionally be placed before it. Before opening for the day, the owner could whisper a brief prayer asking for peaceful customers, successful business, and protection from fire. Fire was one of the greatest fears in any Roman city. Most taverns relied upon open flames for cooking, heating, and lighting. Buildings often stood close together, many containing wooden beams and furniture that burned easily. A single accident could spread rapidly through an entire neighborhood. For this reason, many Romans believed divine protection was as important as careful preparation. Travelers carried their own beliefs into the tavern. Someone arriving safely after crossing dangerous mountains might quietly thank the gods before taking the first sip of wine.
a sailor who had survived a violent storm at sea, sometimes shared stories that listeners found almost impossible to believe. Towering waves, lightning striking nearby, ships disappearing into darkness. To the sailor, survival often felt like a gift from the gods. The audience listened with fascination. Whether every detail was true mattered less than the lesson behind the story. Life was uncertain. Fortune could change without warning. The Romans accepted this reality. Because the future remained unpredictable, many searched constantly for signs. An unusual bird flying overhead, a strange dream before sunrise, an unexpected sound during an important meeting. These might all be interpreted as omens. Inside taverns, such conversations became common.
One customer claimed that seeing a raven before beginning a journey brought terrible luck. Another insisted that the same bird represented wisdom rather than disaster. A merchant refused to leave the city because he believed the previous night's dream warned him of danger. His friends laughed. A week later, news arrived that bandits had attacked travelers along the very road he had planned to take. Coincidence? Perhaps, but stories like this strengthened ancient beliefs. The more often they were repeated, the more convincing they became. Dreams fascinated the Romans. Many believed that dreams carried messages from the divine world. Not every dream deserved attention. Some reflected ordinary worries. Others seemed too vivid to ignore. Inside taverns, customers frequently compared unusual dreams while sharing evening meals. One dreamed of endless water. Another dreamed of fire consuming a city. Someone else dreamed of meeting a long-dead relative. Interpretations varied. No one truly knew their meaning. Yet everyone enjoyed discussing them. Fortune tellers occasionally appeared in or around busy taverns. Some claimed to read the future through astrology. Others examined hands, observed behavior, or relied upon mysterious traditions passed down through generations. Not everyone believed them. Many considered such people clever entertainers. Others became devoted customers. A worried merchant hoping for profitable trade might pay for reassurance. A young soldier preparing for his first campaign sought encouraging words. A widow facing an uncertain future wished to hear that better days were coming. Hope itself possessed tremendous value. Whether the prediction proved accurate sometimes mattered less than the comfort it provided. Amulets were another common sight. Many Romans carried small objects believed to offer protection. Some were worn around the neck. Others remained hidden beneath clothing. Children often received protective charms from their parents. Soldiers carried lucky tokens into battle. Travelers kept personal amulets close during long journeys. Even tavern owners occasionally displayed protective symbols near entrances, believing they guarded both family and business from misfortune. Certain symbols appeared repeatedly throughout Roman society. The evil eye was widely feared. Many believed envy itself possessed destructive power. A successful merchant attracting jealous attention might suffer unexpected losses. A healthy child admired too enthusiastically could become ill. To guard against such dangers, protective symbols and charms became deeply woven into daily life. These beliefs might seem unusual today, yet nearly every culture throughout history has developed similar traditions. Humans naturally search for meaning in uncertain events. Ancient Romans were no different. Religion itself formed an important part of tavern conversations.
The empire welcomed countless gods and religious traditions from across its vast territories. Visitors from Egypt spoke of Isis. Greeks honored their own ancient deities, many of whom the Romans identified with their own gods. Eastern merchants introduced unfamiliar beliefs. As the centuries passed, new religions gradually spread through Roman cities. This diversity created fascinating discussions, sometimes respectful, sometimes heated. Most ordinary Romans accepted that different peoples honored different gods. The empire itself became a meeting place for many faiths. A tavern reflected that diversity better than almost any other location. At one table, a sailor thanked Neptune for safe passage across the sea. Nearby, a merchant praised Mercury for successful trade. Across the room, another traveler quietly spoke of a deity unknown to most of those listening. Ideas traveled alongside people. Beliefs crossed borders. Religions evolved through countless ordinary conversations. Ghost stories became especially popular late at night. As the wine continued to flow and the lamps burned lower, someone inevitably recalled a strange encounter. A haunted road. A mysterious figure walking through the fog. Unexplained footsteps inside an abandoned building. A traveler who vanished without leaving a trace. The audience leaned closer. Logic mattered less than atmosphere. Outside, darkness surrounded the tavern. Inside, every flickering shadow seemed to strengthen the storyteller's words. Children listening from nearby doorways often remembered these tales for the rest of their lives. Some repeated them years later. Each retelling added new details, new mysteries, new fears. Thus, legends grew. Not through official records, but through evenings spent around shared tables beneath smoky ceilings. The Roman tavern preserved more than meals and conversations. It preserved imagination, and it gave people a place to explore questions that no philosopher, priest, or emperor could fully answer. What happens after death? Can the gods truly hear our prayers? Do dreams reveal the future? Is luck real? Can fate be changed? No one possessed certain answers, yet everyone possessed opinions. And so, night after night, those discussions continued. Perhaps that was the greatest mystery of all. The Roman Empire was built upon military strength, engineering brilliance, and political organization. But beneath those achievements lived millions of ordinary people, trying to understand a world that often seemed unpredictable. Harvests failed, storms destroyed ships. Disease appeared without warning. Loved ones disappeared into war. Success arrived unexpectedly. Fortune vanished overnight. Religion and superstition offered explanations where certainty could not. The tavern became one of the places where those explanations were shared, challenged, and remembered. As the final customers finished their wine and the lamps slowly dimmed, the conversations faded into silence. The stories remained, waiting for another evening. Another traveler, another question, another mystery. And somewhere beyond the quiet streets of Rome, beneath the same stars that watched over emperors and laborers alike, the ancient world continued to believe that not everything could be explained by reason alone. Some mysteries were meant to remain mysteries. Wealth, poverty, business, and the economic life of ancient Roman taverns. Every morning before the streets of Rome filled with shouting merchants and rattling wagons, tavern owners were already thinking about money. Not wealth in the grand sense that senators and aristocrats imagined, not fortunes measured in vast estates, marble villas, or fleets of trading ships. Their concerns were much smaller. Would enough customers come today?
Would there be enough bread to last until evening? Could they afford another shipment of wine before the current supply ran out? Would today's earnings be enough to pay tomorrow's expenses? For the ordinary tavern owner, survival depended upon answering these questions correctly. The Roman Empire was one of the greatest commercial societies of the ancient world. Goods moved constantly across land and sea. Ships crossed the Mediterranean carrying grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, wine from Italy and Gaul, marble from Greece, spices from the East, and countless other products that filled the markets of Rome. Yet behind this enormous network of international trade stood thousands of small businesses. Among the most common were taverns. Most were not luxurious establishments. Many occupied narrow buildings squeezed between workshops, apartment houses, and small stores. The rooms were often modest. Furniture was simple. Decorations were limited. The value of the business did not lie in expensive surroundings. It lay in constant customers. A successful tavern depended upon regular visitors. The baker who arrived every evening after work, the carpenter who stopped for lunch, the merchant who held business meetings at the same table every week, the traveler who returned whenever his journeys brought him back to the city. These familiar faces formed the foundation of the business. Without them, profits quickly disappeared. Every coin mattered. Unlike wealthy landowners who earned income from enormous agricultural estates, tavern keepers lived much closer to financial uncertainty. 1 week of poor business could create serious difficulties. A month of declining customers might threaten the family's future. There were always expenses waiting. Wine had to be purchased, flour delivered, vegetables bought fresh before they spoiled, cooking oil replaced, firewood gathered, broken furniture repaired, taxes paid, buildings maintained. Nothing was free. Every loaf of bread sold represented hours of unseen labor. Every cup of wine carried its own cost. Success depended upon careful balance. Charge too much, and customers would choose another tavern. Charge too little, and the business could not survive. Finding the right price required experience. Competition was constant. In busy neighborhoods, several taverns might stand within a short walking distance of one another. Each hoped to attract loyal customers. Some competed through better food. Others became known for stronger wine. A few earned reputations for cleanliness. Others relied upon friendly service or lively evening entertainment. Reputation became one of the most valuable forms of wealth. Without newspapers or advertisements, satisfied customers spread the word themselves. A traveler who enjoyed excellent hospitality recommended the tavern to others. A merchant pleased with fair prices returned again. A soldier stationed nearby brought fellow soldiers. Business grew through trust. It could also disappear through disappointment. One dishonest transaction might damage years of hard work. Food itself represented an economic challenge. Roman taverns served people from many different backgrounds. Some customers could afford generous meals. Others counted every coin before ordering. The owner needed options. Simple bread and olives for those with limited money. Hearty stews for hungry laborers. Better quality meat or imported wine for wealthier visitors. Every customer mattered. A poor worker buying 1 cup of diluted wine each evening remained valuable because he returned regularly. Steady income often proved more reliable than occasional luxury. Seasonal changes affected business as well. Harvest time brought increased activity as farmers visited nearby towns. Festivals attracted enormous crowds. Military movements filled roadside taverns with soldiers and officials. Winter storms sometimes reduced travel, leaving many establishments unusually quiet. Experienced owners learned to prepare for these cycles. Good seasons helped them survive difficult ones. The roads of the empire also shaped economic life. Every traveler represented potential income. Someone arriving after several days on horseback needed food, perhaps a place to sleep, fresh water for animals, directions, information about the road ahead. The tavern offered all of these services. Roadside establishments therefore became essential parts of Roman commerce. Without them, long-distance travel would have been far more difficult. Merchants especially appreciated dependable taverns. Business negotiations often continued over meals. Prices for grain, oil, cloth, pottery, livestock, and imported goods were discussed while wine cups slowly emptied. Some agreements lasted only days. Others created partnerships that continued for years. The tavern provided neutral ground where strangers could become trusted associates. Coins changed hands constantly. Roman currency circulated through nearly every corner of the empire. Bronze, silver, and occasionally gold coins passed across tavern tables every day. Owners learned to recognize worn coins, foreign coins, counterfeit coins. Accepting false currency could mean losing an entire day's profit. Experience became the best defense. Some customers requested credit. A familiar neighbor might promise to pay after selling next week's harvest. A trusted craftsman expected payment once his latest commission was completed. Granting credit required careful judgment. Help the wrong person, and the debt might never be repaid. Refuse everyone, and loyal customers might leave. Relationships mattered as much as mathematics. Wealth and poverty often sat only a few feet apart inside the same tavern. A prosperous merchant wearing fine clothing might dine beside a laborer whose hands still carried dust from construction work. Their meals differed. Their incomes differed. Yet for a short time they shared the same room, the same fire, the same conversations. This mixture of social classes made taverns unusual places within Roman society. Outside, status remained highly visible. Inside, practical needs created moments of unexpected equality. Everyone became hungry. Everyone became thirsty. Everyone sought companionship. Of course, differences never disappeared completely. The wealthy could purchase better wine, larger meals, private accommodations when available. But even they depended upon the same cooks, servers, and tavern families whose labor made the entire experience possible. Prosperity itself remained uncertain. A merchant might enjoy years of success before losing ships in a violent storm. A poor craftsman could gradually build a respected business through patience and skill. Fortunes changed. The tavern witnessed those changes. It celebrated success. It quietly observed failure. Sometimes the owner knew a customer's financial situation better than anyone else. The man who once ordered expensive imported wine now chose only bread and water. The struggling apprentice eventually became a successful master craftsman. The widow who worried about surviving the winter slowly rebuilt her life. Years passed, lives changed, the tavern remained. Perhaps this explains why these establishments occupied such an important place within Roman communities.
They were more than businesses. They became witnesses to ordinary human lives, births, marriages, friendships, arguments, successes, failures. Every day added another chapter. Every customer contributed another story. The Roman economy was built upon countless exchanges.
Some involved enormous fortunes. Others consisted of a single loaf of bread purchased by a tired traveler. Both mattered, because every great civilization ultimately depends upon ordinary people buying, selling, working, and trusting one another. The tavern stood quietly at the center of that daily exchange. It transformed food into comfort, wine into conversation, strangers into customers, customers into friends, and simple transactions into relationships that sometimes lasted a lifetime. As another evening came to an end, the owner carefully counted the day's coins beneath the fading light of an oil lamp. Some would pay suppliers, some would purchase tomorrow's food, some would repair broken furniture. Very little remained. Yet when dawn arrived, the doors would open once again, because that was the rhythm of Roman life. Work, trade, conversation, hope. One day after another, one customer after another, one coin after another. Quietly sustaining an empire that stretched farther than any of them could fully imagine. The decline of Roman taverns, the fall of an empire, and the legacy they left behind. Nothing built by human hands lasts forever. The Roman Empire, which had once stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the deserts of North Africa and from the Atlantic Ocean to the borders of the Near East, appeared almost invincible at the height of its power. Its roads connected distant provinces. Its armies guarded thousands of miles of frontier. Its merchants filled markets with goods from across the known world. Its cities bustled with life from sunrise until long after sunset. And in nearly every city, town, and roadside settlement, the familiar doors of Roman taverns welcomed those seeking food, wine, warmth, and companionship. For generations, they had stood quietly beside the great events of history. When emperors rose to power, taverns remained open. When victorious legions marched through city gates, customers gathered to celebrate. When merchants discovered new opportunities, deals were made over shared cups of wine. When families mourned loved ones lost to war or disease, they found comfort within familiar walls. The tavern had become woven into the fabric of Roman life. Yet even institutions that seem permanent must eventually face change. The transformation came slowly. So slowly, in fact, that many Romans probably failed to notice it while living through it. The empire's problems did not appear overnight. Economic difficulties grew over generations. Inflation weakened the value of money. Heavy taxation burdened farmers and merchants alike. Political instability brought uncertainty. Emperors came and went with alarming speed during certain periods. Civil wars divided the empire from within. At the same time, pressure increased along Rome's frontiers. Germanic tribes, Huns, and other peoples challenged borders that had once seemed secure. Military resources became stretched. Trade routes faced greater danger. Travel became less predictable. Every one of these changes affected ordinary taverns. When merchants traveled less frequently, fewer customers arrived. When roads became unsafe, travelers chose shorter journeys or remained at home altogether. When harvests failed or taxes increased,
Families had less money to spend on food and wine outside their homes. The decline of commerce echoed inside tavern walls. A room that had once been filled with lively conversations might now contain only a handful of customers. Owners who had served generations of loyal visitors found themselves struggling to survive. Some adapted, others closed their doors forever. Cities themselves began to change. Certain urban centers that had once housed hundreds of thousands of people gradually lost population. Public buildings fell into disrepair. Magnificent baths closed. Markets shrank. Neighborhoods became quieter. The endless energy that had defined imperial Rome slowly faded. The taverns felt this transformation more clearly than almost anyone. After all, they depended upon people. The fewer people passing through the streets, the fewer customers entered their doors. Religion also changed the character of Roman society. As Christianity spread throughout the empire, new values gradually reshaped everyday life. Many Christians continued to eat and drink in ordinary establishments, but attitudes toward excessive drinking, gambling, and certain forms of entertainment became increasingly critical. Not every tavern welcomed disorder. Not every customer sought drunkenness. Yet the reputation of some establishments caused religious leaders to speak against behavior they believed encouraged vice rather than virtue. The result was not the immediate disappearance of taverns. Instead, their role slowly evolved alongside the changing culture. Some adapted by serving travelers more than local drinkers. Others became respectable inns offering food and lodging, with less emphasis on late-night entertainment. History rarely changes in sudden moments. It changes through countless small decisions made by ordinary people. Even as the Western Roman Empire approached its final centuries, taverns continued to serve those who remained. A soldier still needed supper. A traveler still required shelter. A merchant still wanted information about tomorrow's journey. Life continued despite uncertainty. Then came one of history's most famous turning points. In the year 476, the last Western Roman emperor was removed from power. Historians often describe this event as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. To later generations, it became a symbolic ending. But for ordinary people living at the time, life did not simply stop. The baker still woke before sunrise. Farmers still attended their fields. Blacksmiths still repaired tools. And somewhere a tavern owner still lit the morning fire, hoping customers would arrive before midday. Empires fall more dramatically in history books than they do in everyday life. People continue living. Children continue growing. Meals continue being prepared. Roads continue carrying travelers. The familiar routines of daily existence survive political upheaval far longer than monuments sometimes do. Many Roman taverns gradually disappeared through neglect. Some were destroyed by fires. Others collapsed after decades without proper maintenance. Earthquakes damaged entire neighborhoods in certain regions. Buildings that had once echoed with laughter slowly crumbled into silence. Stone walls fell. Wooden beams rotted. Roofs disappeared beneath wind and rain. Nature patiently reclaimed what humanity had built. Centuries passed. Grass grew where customers had once gathered. Trees took root beside forgotten roads. Dust covered broken pottery scattered across abandoned floors. The voices faded, but they never vanished completely. Archaeologists would one day uncover them again. Excavations at places like Pompeii revealed astonishing glimpses of Roman daily life.
When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it buried homes, workshops, shops, and taverns beneath volcanic ash. Tragic as the disaster was, it preserved countless details that time might otherwise have erased. Stone counters remained standing. Large storage jars still rested inside serving areas. Wall paintings survived. Graffiti scratched into plaster revealed jokes, advertisements, political opinions, declarations of love, and ordinary conversations frozen in time. Suddenly, historians could step inside spaces where Romans had laughed, argued, eaten, and shared wine nearly 2,000 years earlier. These discoveries transformed our understanding of ancient taverns. No longer were they merely mentioned in written texts. They became real places once again, places where ordinary people had lived ordinary lives, and perhaps that is their greatest legacy. History often celebrates extraordinary individuals, emperors, generals, philosophers, conquerors. Yet civilizations are truly built by ordinary people. The baker, the sailor, the widow running a family business, the merchant traveling unfamiliar roads, the soldier longing for home, the child carrying fresh bread to waiting customers. The tavern welcomed them all. It asked no questions about fame, only whether they wished to sit, eat, drink, and rest for a while. In many ways, modern society has inherited the spirit of the Roman tavern. Restaurants, cafes, pubs, roadside inns, neighborhood gathering places. Though centuries separate us, their purpose remains remarkably familiar. People still gather after work. Friends still celebrate milestones over shared meals. Travelers still stop at roadside establishments after long journeys. Business agreements still begin over food and conversation. Stories still grow more dramatic as the evening continues. Human nature has changed far less than architecture. That continuity reminds us of something deeply comforting. Across 2,000 years of history, despite enormous differences in language, technology, politics, and culture, certain experiences remain universal. The desire for companionship, the comfort of warm food after a difficult day, the joy of laughter shared with strangers who become friends, the hope that tomorrow's journey will be a little easier than today's. The Roman tavern was never merely about wine. It was about people. It was about connection. It was about creating a place where life's burdens could be set aside, if only for an evening. As the final lamp burned low and the last customer stepped into the cool night air, another ordinary day came to an end. No one inside could have imagined that centuries later, people across the world would still wonder what it had been like to sit at those wooden tables, listen to those conversations, and raise a simple clay cup in the heart of ancient Rome. Yet here we are, still listening, still imagining, still fascinated by the lives of people whose names have long since been forgotten. Their empire has vanished. Their buildings have become ruins. Their voices have faded into history, but their stories endure. And perhaps, as long as people continue gathering to share food, conversation, laughter, and memories beneath a welcoming roof, the spirit of the ancient Roman tavern will never truly disappear. A toast across 2,000 years. If you could leave the modern world behind and spend just one evening inside an ancient Roman tavern, you would probably discover that it felt both wonderfully familiar and surprisingly foreign. The room would be smaller than you expected. The air would be thick with smoke from oil lamps and cooking fires. The scent of fresh bread, roasting meat, olive oil, herbs, and spilled wine would mix together into a fragrance unlike anything in the modern world. The walls would be worn by time. The wooden tables would carry the scratches of countless meals, celebrations, arguments, and quiet conversations. There would be no electric lights, no music playing from hidden speakers, no clocks reminding people of the hour. Only the steady crackling of the fire, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter echoing through the room. You would see a farmer sitting beside a merchant, a sailor sharing stories with a blacksmith, a retired soldier remembering battles fought decades before, a traveler from a distant province describing cities most of the room would never see, a tavern keeper moving from table to table, making sure every guest had enough to eat and drink, children helping their parents before quietly disappearing upstairs to sleep. Outside the great city of Rome would continue its endless rhythm. Inside, for a few precious hours, the worries of the day would fade. Throughout this journey, we have explored the Roman tavern from every angle. We have walked through its doors alongside weary travelers. We have tasted the wine that accompanied almost every meal. We have watched merchants negotiate profitable deals. We have listened to sailors describe distant seas. We have heard soldiers recall campaigns fought on the empire's frontiers. We have seen families build their lives around businesses that depended upon the trust of their communities. We have witnessed celebrations, friendships, rivalries, and occasional violence. We have uncovered whispered political discussions, hidden business arrangements, and stories shaped by rumor as much as truth. We have explored the beliefs, superstitions, and mysteries that gave meaning to an uncertain world. And finally, we have watched these taverns endure centuries of prosperity before slowly fading alongside the empire they had served for generations. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson is not about Rome itself, it is about humanity. History often encourages us to focus on emperors, generals, and famous battles. Those events certainly shaped the ancient world, but they did not define the everyday lives of most Romans. The empire was sustained by ordinary people, by the baker who woke before dawn, by the farmer who harvested grain beneath the summer sun, by the potter shaping clay into useful vessels, by the sailor risking dangerous seas, by the tavern keeper welcoming strangers with food and wine. Their names rarely appeared in official records. Few statues honored them. Few historians wrote about them. Yet without them, Rome could never have become the civilization we remember today. The tavern reminds us that history is not only created in palaces or on battlefields, it is also created in ordinary places where people meet, exchange ideas, build friendships, solve problems, and dream about the future. Many of the greatest changes in human history began with simple conversations. A business partnership, a political idea, a traveler sharing knowledge from another land, a friendship formed between strangers. No one could know which conversation might change a life. That truth remains just as relevant today. Although nearly 2,000 years separate us from ancient Rome, our daily lives are not as different as we sometimes imagine. We still gather around tables. We still celebrate birthdays and weddings. We still comfort friends during difficult times. We still debate politics over meals. We still tell stories that become slightly more dramatic with every retelling. We still welcome travelers. We still search for belonging. Technology has transformed the world,
human nature has not. That is why the Roman tavern continues to fascinate us. It feels ancient, yet it also feels familiar. Archaeologists continue to uncover fragments of these forgotten places. A broken wine cup, a stone counter, a faded wall painting, a piece of graffiti scratched into plaster by someone who never imagined it would survive for centuries. Each discovery reminds us that history is made of real people, not legends. People who laughed, worked, fell in love, argued, made mistakes, raised families, dreamed of better tomorrows. And at the end of long days, many of them found comfort inside a humble tavern. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy of these remarkable places. They preserved something that no empire, no matter how powerful, could ever conquer. The simple human desire to gather together, to share food, to exchange stories, to find warmth after hardship, to feel, even for a little while, that we are not alone, as the final oil lamp burns low, and the tavern keeper closes the heavy wooden door for the night. The voices slowly fade into silence. The streets grow quiet. The fire settles into glowing embers. Tomorrow the doors will open once again. New travelers will arrive. New stories will begin. New friendships will be formed. Such was the rhythm of life in ancient Rome. And though the empire itself has long since passed into history, that rhythm still echoes through every cafe, inn, restaurant, and gathering place where people continue to meet over food, drink, and conversation. The stones of Rome may have weathered with time. Its emperors have become names in history books. Its soldiers have long since laid down their shields. But somewhere in every place where strangers become friends over a shared table, the spirit of the ancient Roman tavern quietly lives on. Thank you for taking this journey through the wine, mystery, and everyday life of ancient Roman taverns.